everyone. Thank you for joining. I'd like to start us off by briefly introducing Lab 49 for those of you who may be new here. Lab is a boutique consulting firm that specializes in the creation of digital products for financial services companies. Our team provides expertise in product design and engineering and collaborates closely with our clients to create cutting-edge business transforming digital products. I have some of our expert team here with me today. I'll go around the room and kind of introduce everybody. First off, we have Kredek, our head of emerging technology. Then we have Raj, who is one of our principal product managers. And we have James, who is our resident futurist and principal product designer on the team. And then just to introduce myself, my name's Anna, and I'm the head of product design here at Lab. And I'll just be moderating our conversation today. So to get into that conversation, the topic that we have on the board for today is AUM is up for grabs, deploying AI-powered experiences to win market share. This topic has been a focus of our team because a lot of our clients are large asset managers. And one recurring theme that we hear from these clients is that they have a hard time attracting and retaining AUM, especially in the current environment. So this issue is especially top of mind right now because, like, as the largest wealth transfer in history has begun, with wealth transferring from analog native boomers to digital native millennials. So with that context in mind, Raj, would you mind telling us a bit more about the team's product-led approach to this problem?
Sure, Anna. So our approach, as always, begins with the business problem we're trying to solve. So you introed that. And the users that are central to addressing the problem, right? So in this case, the challenge, as you mentioned, is growing AUM. And the main focus is wealth managers, right? And Anna, you mentioned this massive transfer of wealth is just starting. I think the number that I've heard is $70 trillion, right? $70 trillion is beginning to move from the older generations to the younger generation. And every asset manager obviously wants a piece of this pie, right? So these new investors naturally have different preferences, different behaviors, different expectations, and they're looking for alternatives, right? And there are plenty of options out there. And as a result, as you mentioned, these assets are up for grabs. So we talk to a lot of asset managers and wealth managers, on a day-to-day basis. As you mentioned, they're a huge part of our business. And a couple of themes that we see are number one, time, right? They only have a limited amount of time to really provide high-touch service to really just a handful of clients, right? And two is information, right? They only have quick access to a very small subset of the client information that actually exists within the organization. So we wanted to take a look at, what are the new features and capabilities that Gen AI introduces that can help wealth managers with these two areas. So our hypothesis is that Gen AI, when given access to enterprise data, can help retain and attract AUM by developing deeper relationships, with clients, uncovering new insights, right? And personalized recommendations for clients, and really scaling up the ability to interact with many more clients than is possible today.
Great. So I think you already started answering this question, but is there anything else that helps to explain why Gen AI is so promising in addressing this problem?
Yeah, I mean, it's Gen AI is really promising because it's really so evolutionary, right, in its features and capabilities that we can actually put in the hands of knowledge workers, right, like wealth managers, right, and once you provide these systems with access to enterprise data, right, this is new data that LLMs weren't originally trained on, right? So so data like that you find within CRM systems, transactional data, corporate operational data, and then unstructured data like documents, email conversations, call logs, and then even external data like market data and social media data, right? Once you give these systems access to all this data, it becomes incredibly powerful. So features like semantic search and data analysis can lead to outcomes like hyper-personalized client recommendations and content generation. And these are just a couple of features that GenAI puts in the hands of knowledge workers. And then when we add on to these features, things like agents, and agent-driven workflows, and a way to orchestrate all this functionality, we can build a whole new class of applications that that really address challenges like AUM, like growing market share. So our goal was to develop a product vision that sort of encapsulates these new features. And I can talk about it all day, but I think it'd be a lot more interesting if James can kind of walk us through the user experience that we imagined.
Thanks, Raj. Over the years, Raj and I have talked a lot about disruption, technology, what's next in general, and for sure, Gen AI is something we've talked about a lot this year. Beyond this project that we're going to talk about today. But based on all the things that Raj talked about, we wanted to put together a prototype that is it's not an end vision, it's the beginning of a vision. It's something that the engineering team that Kartik is leading could start building like right away. So it's very much like in an MVP style. But we know like we want to build that out into like a full comprehensive wealth vision in the future. And that work is ongoing. But we wanted to start really with what can we do today? And I think for most people, when they think of Gen AI, everyone at this point is very familiar with ChatGPT. And so thinking about that kind of chat interaction and how do we get it out of just being chat and into a larger productivity tool like that. That's kind of like what the grounding of this prototype was. I'm going to share my screen, hopefully. There we go. So what we've got here, it's calling it Wealth GPT. It's a very creative name. And you can see that it looks very much like what you would expect from ChatGPT over here in the main panel. And there is a lot more in here than just this chat interface, and we'll get to that later. But for the purpose of exploring how Gen AI can work, it made sense to start here. This is what the engineering team started to build and do it in real life. So it kind of informed the types of problems, new problems that we could create for them, essentially, from a user perspective. I think one of the interesting things about Gen AI that comes out of what Raj was talking about is that one of the cool things about it is, today there's a very set way of doing product design. There's a process. It's pretty defined. Over the last 10 years in particular, the whole design thinking, agile framework of how do we research and define a problem and build a solution for it. I think everyone is pretty familiar with that. But I think what's new with Gen AI powered systems is you don't necessarily have to do all of that. Once the system is built, it's going to adapt to things in real time. So that whole product cycle, in some cases, may go away. Our users may be able to use the tools that we provide them to create their own solution, and we don't have to necessarily hard code it. Then we can go back, we can learn from what they're doing and maybe improve on that after the fact. But we kind of don't have to wait for a whole design-led solution necessarily to get to a business solution. So from the Gen AI perspective here in this prototype, the first thing that's highlighted is new emerging theme, because we're thinking in terms of, this is our user here, it's a wealth advisor for a large firm. You might have 100 to 200 clients. We know that wealth advisors at the large firms, they are, they're kind of more incentivized to find new AUM necessarily than to protect the AUM that they already have, which is pretty much the inverse of smaller firms. But what we wanted to focus on here was really that kind of large firm wealth advisor experience and how do they try to protect the AUM when they don't have a lot of time to spend on it. They're kind of focused on prospecting, but they also need to protect the AUM. How can we help them do that? So we want to have, kind of the Gen AI, it's kind of an extension really of what already happens today with alerts and notifications and rules-driven systems that happen already in the back end. Gen AI just can kind of take that to the next level we have this concept of themes. It identifies themes among my clients. What are people doing? Who's at risk? What are the opportunities? What are the risks? Group those together into themes. This notification, there's probably a lot of different ways we could notify the user about it, but for like an MVP standpoint, it made sense to kind of start here with just a chat, have that as one of these prompts that are kind of canned here. I can hit new emerging themes, and the system tells me, well, this is the latest theme identified based on activity over the last 3 months. And where we started with this to go beyond ChatGPT, we're like, well, let's not just do text. How can we pull in web components? How can we pull in like the design system? How can we pull that into the response? So it's not just a chat system exactly. It's kind of chat plus. Now, after we already kind of went through this, ChatGPT had their big 4.0 announcement, and they talked about bringing in the multimodal content. But we were definitely already thinking along those lines, and then also tying it in further with the kind of mature design systems that are already out there in a larger firm to use that directly. So it's not just throwing away the past. It's kind of just taking what we have, making it better, and extending it. So in this example, we have a decline in systematic investment, and this is probably the easiest use case that we could think of to try to just illustrate what we were doing here, where in this case, I have clients, they've been making investments over time. Maybe these clients, they haven't retired yet, so you wouldn't expect those investments to drop, but in this case, they are. And so why is that happening? That's obviously a risk to this person. Maybe they're going to leave the firm, maybe they're going somewhere else, what's going on. And as part of this theme, we have here the case study for a specific client who illustrates this theme as determined by the system. Also, I'll just note that I think anybody who is in a role like this, you're definitely scouring the internet for publicly available information. You're trying to understand what's important to them, life events, employment changes. So for sure, we imagine this system kind of going out and pulling that information in directly instead of having to do that as one of the steps in your prep for calling somebody. So when I ask for that case study, I click on Emma Williams, it pulls up not her full customer profile, and we'll get to that later, but just why she is emblematic of this theme that has been discovered. So it's showing these monthly deposits falling over time. And certainly from a prototype perspective, like this is not about, this is the exact reason why this theme is occurring. Like we're more interested in what are the interactions and what could that mean for the user experience and productivity apps kind of in the future. So this is definitely kind of a simplistic example, but let's just say that I'm looking at this chart, Emma Williams' performance versus benchmark, maybe she's not doing as well, and that's why she's lowering her investments. But maybe I also want to ask a different question about that chart, and I can ask it here directly, just like I would in ChatGPT, and have it generate a new chart essentially. And that's something where today, you could get new data visualized in different ways in current systems, but it's not always as easy as just asking the question and asking for a new chart. It might be you've got to export it to Excel and do it yourself. You have to go to Tableau or Power BI and add more data set to the one that you're interested in. Like there's a lot of manual steps that typically are involved there, which, since this Gen AI has access to all that underlying data, it can just do it for us. So then if I go forward and I say, maybe I'm at this point, I'm doing some research and I want to reach out to Emma. I say, what's the best way to contact her? Because maybe I don't remember. I have a lot of clients. I want to get kind of a reminder on what her preferences are. And we get the response back that she prefers phone calls. And then also from some other psychographic analysis service, you kind of pull in what are the dimensions of her personality that we might want to be aware of before we talk to her. Actually, I want to go back one step because here, when I made this new chart, I forgot to mention that we're thinking about this not just in terms of like a short-term chat, but also, how do I use this going in the future? Like I don't want to have to regenerate this chart. So if I right-click any of the things that are in this chat flow, I want to be able to add it to a client page, and maybe I want to add it to a document that I'm going to send out. I could regenerate it, mark it as a bad response, all those typical things, or bookmark it and share it with somebody else. So I just wanted to note that before I jumped forward again. So then, also I could get reminded about some of the notes that we had in previous calls, interaction history kind of across the different channels. So we're just showing here, phone support calls, website interactions, emails. So in this particular story, maybe there's something going on, and you can see there's this kind of spike in interaction history with the firm across different channels. Maybe that has something to do with why this is dropping off. Maybe she just doesn't like her online experience. The portal is frustrating. Something is going on. There's a lot of different possibilities, and we're not trying to answer those exactly. We're just trying to show how to pull up that information so that, now I'm going to say, generate some talking points in a new window. Here, I think there's kind of an interesting world of possibilities Gen AI may open up. Today, a lot of the operational systems in big banks, it's about context sharing, it's about window management, it's about interoperability. And since in order for Gen AI to work, it's kind of pulling that data together in a deep way underneath the hood, maybe there's a better way to do some of that in the future. So in this example, it generates these talking points. I can have it in a new window. I can move it off to the side so I can refer to that when I actually make the call. I'm sure this would be another service that we kind of pull in. And then as we're talking, it's kind of doing that emotional response in real time, and then also potentially pulling up resources or ejection handling based on the actual call. So it's in real time and it's all here in one place. So I think from the viewpoint of like the chat interaction, that pretty much covers what we were thinking. And that it was definitely the core of what we prototyped on the engineering side. But I'll just talk kind of briefly about some of the larger wealth of vision that we try to tie this into. So that, we're calling that the Copilot, I think for obvious reasons. Everybody pretty much calls that. But, here's kind of like a themes view where Raj and I kind of talked about these themes that come up. You can kind of think about it as being a kind of a 4-quadrant matrix of risk and opportunity, and where do these themes fall within that. So some of those themes would be, you're trying to protect AUM. Some of them are you're trying to grow AUM, and then see that change in theme over time. We have this concept of a My Agent dashboard. So this is kind of turns into metrics that I care about. My thought on this is, how do we make a CRM dashboard that people actually want to use? One way we do that is by making it fast, because I know that's a pain point with current CRMs. I've seen any number of users pull up a CRM homepage, which is a dashboard, and they immediately skip past it before even one module has loaded. So speed is certainly an important factor of the user experience on these systems. But ultimately, I think the cool thing that this lets you do is you ask a question, you get answers. They're updating in real time. It's based on current data. It's not just kind of hard coded in the background, because it's a Gen AI process. This is similar, like my overview homepage. We have over here in the Copilot, the same emerging theme that was identified in the chat is here. You could click into that. There's be a lot of different ways that you could navigate this system. It's very not linear, by design. It's all about connecting things. And so from here, if I have today's event, I've got the call with Emma that we just kind of did research on. There's some information about it. If I click into Emma, I get more kind of a traditional customer 360 view. Although here I would note, while we were doing that research, we created this new visualization. Once again, I could just add it to this page directly. So I think there's a lot of interesting things from a design perspective about customizing layouts, having them update, be dynamic, all of those sorts of things. There's a lot of possibilities there. And I think that's pretty much the scope of the demo we wanted to go over today.
Cool. Thanks, James. This is very interesting stuff. So question that I have for you, and this is a very design-centric question, but as you were going through this demo, the tool is creating data visualizations and responses that all have a similar visual treatment. They all look like they fit into this UI. So I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are on what Gen AI means for design systems.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of levels to that. Number one is, and I think this is immediately happening in the short term, is that we know that there are going to be tools where you can leverage Gen AI to take existing design systems and use those components, understand what it's for, and use that as part of a response. But I think there's additional levels of interesting capability there because, why not take it a step further? A lot of design systems are based on simple sets of underlying principles that you kind of, as a designer, have to painstakingly build out many variations for. But there's no reason why you couldn't basically feed those rules into the Gen AI and have it build a design system for you in the first place. So not only does it understand what you built manually, but it builds it automatically, where you could, iterate on that. You could go back and forth with it. So I think there's a lot of cool things there. And then maybe one last step into the future is that I think a common thing we've heard from users where sometimes there's a disagreement between product and design teams and actual end users. It's a very simple thing. It's white space. Like, how much information am I seeing? There's been kind of a battle on that front for the last 10 years, probably started with the iPhone about, some teams wanting more and more things to be space and be consumer friendly, whereas other people just want to see as much information as possible, especially in the finance world. So if the Gen AI is kind of deeply integrated with that design system, why not, as a user, just say, hey, make everything denser. I want to see more information, and have it actually adapt everything for you in real time. That would be pretty cool.
Yeah, that would be super cool. Personalization, like personalizing a design system for yourself for a specific user would be very cool.
I kind of see that as part of a long-running trend where in the past, everything was very pixel perfect. Everything was super dedicated. I want this thing to be 480 pixels wide. And then we got into responsive design, and there's a little less control. I think with Gen AI and integrating deeply with design systems, there'll be still kind of less maybe product and design control and more control in the hands of the user, which is a shift, but I think it's a pretty cool shift.
Cool. Cool. So you yourself mentioned that there are some similarities between what we're showing in the demo and other CRM tools. So I want to ask, why is this kind of orchestration layer solution better than employing an existing CRM tool?
I think, that's an interesting question. It's probably, again, many levels, but I think a lot of the existing CRMs, the big ones, they're basically based around a no-code, low-code model. And I know Raj and we've already talked to some other products in other areas where they started out as low-code, no-code. And then what they found was Gen AI kind of removed the need to do that. Like, why not just go the next step and get rid of that completely and just go to a Gen AI developed layer? So I think the short answer is those big CRMs, they're hard to change. They're like the Titanic. You're not going to turn that around in a short period of time. If you can, it's probably much faster to create a new interface using the data that exists there. That relational data is obviously great. People love the data. What they don't love is the experience of trying to find the data once it's in there, or the experience of adding notes to a record. And then later on, finding all the notes that are related to a record. Like, that's difficult today. So if you kind of take that as what we're trying to do as a solution, it might be easier, it might be quicker and faster and cheaper to actually build something new than wait for that to happen from a product, third-party product perspective.
Yeah, 100%. And I would just add to that, if you're dealing with a typical CRM system, you only have access to the data that the CRM system, has access to, right? And when we talk to wealth managers, asset managers, one of their complaints is that it's very difficult to, to take CRM data and then integrate that with other data that they really need for a client, like their performance data or their operational data, and that takes time and effort to integrate, right? So rather than do all that, have an interface that has access to all these various data sources and a way to interact with that data as a domain expert, as a knowledge worker. You don't necessarily need to be a data scientist.
I want to add one more bit to that, because I think when I started this project, I was definitely thinking from the wealth management, we were thinking about like the financial kind of analysis side about AUM in particular, like protecting it or getting more. But I think when we talk to wealth advisors about this specifically, like you kind of learn it's really hard to separate the CRM aspect from the wealth management aspect because so much of it is relationship driven. So unless those systems are really, really deeply linked, then it's not going to be ideal. You're going to still be jumping from system to system because there's no way to separate the personal relationship from the wealth advising function.
Yeah, if I can just jump in, maybe one more thing to say there would be that the capability of these new generative AI features like LLMs are also dependent on the CRM itself, right? Like, the CRMs have to have that capability to begin with. Now we know that some of the CRMs are doing something in this area, like for example, Einstein for Salesforce. I think it's probably a good option, but they're still a little bit behind in terms of the state of the art models. So the question is, as an enterprise, you have a decision to make. Do you want to sort of put all your eggs in one basket of not just using the CRM, but then also using their models and their capabilities? And because these CRMs are such monsters, like you were talking about, James, that you're then hostage to their sort of integration capabilities. How do you get your data into what Raj was saying? So the question for enterprises really is that, do I want to put my eggs in that basket where I deal with all of that complications, or should I consider getting insights on my data across the board, and maybe CRM becomes an important input to that data instead of that being the hub? So that's probably another reason there.
Cool. One last question for you, James. How would you say that this demo that we created is different than something like ChatGPT?
Well, I think the main reason is because we are trying to think about, this is the beginning of a vision about thinking about wealth management of the future, essentially. Like how do we leverage Gen AI to create a new system based on what people do today, but making things simpler. So I didn't really touch on it with the agents, but like one of those examples is like tasks and workflows. Like, ChatGPT, you can connect that to do tasks and workflows. You can connect to third-party apps. You have to know how to do that. We're trying to make it easy for people to not have to think about it. Like we want them to just be able to ask a question and have it do it for them. But I think that's actually another area that's really interesting about Gen AI that I was thinking about on this project is like, what does this mean for task-based systems and workflow in general for finance? So I think something I've worked on a lot in the past. Those systems tend to be really clunky and difficult to update. If you create new types of tasks, then you've got to get into development, new development workflows and task queues and all kinds of stuff like that. But if you're a user, why not just say, hey, put this person into this workflow and let the Gen AI figure it out for you. I think you could probably string all that together in ChatGPT if you want to spend enough time doing it, but you probably don't.
Yeah, I would just add that what we're envisioning, ChatGPT would just be one sort of component to it, and we're building a lot around that in terms of orchestration and agents and things like that. So the LLM, ChatGPT, and there could be multiple LLMs that we leverage that are specializing in different things, but we can call them or sequence them or route queries to the appropriate LLM. And in many cases, that could be ChatGPT, or it could be something else like Claude or Llama, right? But yeah, I guess my answer would be that our solution is a superset that may include something like ChatGPT as one component.
And 2 weeks from now, there's probably something new anyways, because I think the whole landscape has changed 3 or 4 times since we started this like 3 months ago.
Well, yeah, that's true. Cool. All right, awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that, James. Very cool to see. As you and I both know, like as designers, design-led prototypes are really good for aligning stakeholders around a vision, but it takes a strong engineering team to make those reality. So Credit, could you tell us a bit about the experience on the engineering side of this work?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. I think our designers are amazing. They build these visions, and our product team helps sort of come up with materializing that vision into sort of an experience, and then it gets to the grunt work or the dirty work for engineers to figure out how to actually make it a reality. I think in this specific case, the main challenge was, I mean, this is new, right? Like mostly on the enterprise engineering side, you generally have decades long sort of history of doing things in particular ways, right? You learn through battle tested processes and architecture and design. And now comes in Gen AI released like maybe 1.5 years ago, and everybody's talking about it, and we want to build something with it. So really, I mean, I think our struggle was given the vision that that James and Raj came up with. Like, what are really the primary tech challenges for us, right? Like, what are the technical bedrocks that we have to sort of figure out how to solve for? And I think the first problem that we stumbled on was data, right? Like you saw that there's someone called Emma. Emma has transactions. Emma has positions. Emma is systematically withdrawing, right? And this data isn't in CRM form. This is usually in transactional systems, right? So Emma might be logging in. She might actually be clicking a button to withdraw something that goes somewhere in the enterprise sort of data mart, transactional data stores. So we have to first come up with a lot of synthetic data that can represent realistic users, right? So we can even learn what to do with it. I think the second big problem is that we all use ChatGPT. ChatGPT is amazing, right? But it's not connected to your enterprise data, right? It doesn't know anything about your data. It knows about the world's data. It knows about internet data, but it has no idea about your data. So you want the LLM to be able to reason and derive insights into your specific enterprise data, right? And then your data is both structured and unstructured, right? So you have sort of transactional data, which is mostly structured, right? So you have systems that produce it in a structured manner. But then you also saw James talk about interaction history. These are like phone calls or logs, right? These are like unstructured data. And you want to derive insights from both of these, right? And that was like another challenge. And then of course, I think many of us have probably seen this with ChatGPT. There's this thing of hallucination, right? So they end up hallucinating. They give you wrong answer. And sometimes they make it up. But when you're talking about financial data, especially advice data or transactional data, you definitely don't want hallucination, right? You don't want it to make up something about Emma, which is completely going to throw off both a financial planning and might be a big risk from a regulatory perspective for the firm. So I think all of this were like the main challenges that we were looking into. And then we started using things like something called RAG, which is retrieval augmented generation, and try to sort of combine all this together. But I'll pause there if that sort of makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I'm wondering though, like, in your opinion, what considerations do firms need to take into account when they're thinking about bringing their internal data into an LLM?
Yeah, so I think for the longest time, I think people were really scared about this particular aspect because in the beginning, the idea was that you have to ship all this data. You have to sort of go to openai.com and then, like go to Playground and you upload all this data in, and that's going and living somewhere in OpenAI. And that's unacceptable to enterprises because, of course, it's their proprietary data. But I think we have come along a long way now, right? Since then, I think, of course, OpenAI has solutions. You have other models like Anthropic, you have Llama, and they have all figured out a way to solve this problem, and which is basically RAG, right? This idea that can I create an OpenAI agent, quote unquote agent, that can somehow go and grab this data runtime from my enterprise data stores and still be able to reason with it. So I think the concern most of the enterprises have around data can be sort of mitigated through some of these methodologies. But yeah, I mean, I think essentially thinking about the data you have, how are you going to protect that data? What are the right processes you need to set in place so that you're not, not realizing and leaking that data off into the internet? But like I said, I think we have come a long way now. I think we have better solutions now to deal with those problems.
Mm-hmm. And then what about like data quality considerations?
Yeah, I mean, I think the good thing about this versus traditional ML is that it does allow you a little bit more freedom in terms of having bad data. Now, that's not an excuse. I mean, I think you should always have good data. But if you remember in the old ways of doing traditional ML, there used to be a lot of things around sort of data cleaning. You need to have clean data. You need to sort of process all of that data. And that used to be a whole sort of pipeline that you need to create. Now, of course, if you give bad data, you're going to get bad insights, right? So if you have incorrect data about Emma, what will LLM do, right? Like it's going to just give you incorrect data. But I think the data cleanup and the data quality issues are somewhat mitigated just because the LLMs are so vastly more superior in sort of understanding the overall context that it can sometimes hide some of those inefficiencies that you might have in the data. But having said that, I mean, you of course should think about data quality. Absolutely.
Cool. Cool. So, I mean, I would be curious to hear a bit more about some of the challenges that our teams have encountered, like working with these cutting edge technologies.
Yeah, so why don't I don't know, James, if you have it up, if you can share the screen, and we can walk through some of the interesting bits that we found, and I'll try to keep it only as much technical as we want it to be. So Anna, interrupt me. But yeah, so this is what I talked about, synthetic data, right? So you need to generate a lot of synthetic data, and then we realized while we were doing this work that that's actually a traditional problem, even for non-Gen AI purposes, right? For large enterprises, generating a lot of synthetic data for their own testing is already hard. And we thought, in the spirit of thinking about Gen AI, why not use Gen AI itself to generate synthetic data? So what we did was, and this was Raj who did this work, he went to ChatGPT and sort of generated realistic call logs, right? So you as a customer, Emma, again, calling up a wealth advisor and having a conversation, what does a realistic conversation look like, right? So like generating that sort of unstructured data using ChatGPT, but then also generating structured data, through other tools like SDV, which helps you sort of generate a lot of data at scale, right? So basically what we ended up doing was we got a lot of data, and we got a lot of structured and unstructured data. But these were all sort of scaled up, but they didn't have relationships, right? So what you want is that your data to have the right relationships, right? So you want to have Emma, who is the same person calling you, Emma, who's the same person who's doing transactions, and this sort of correlation needs to be established in the data throughout, right? So while we got upscale data, we were not able to establish those relationships. And that's where we used another tool called Mockaroo, which basically helped us manage all those relationships. And at the end of it, we got a pretty large data set, which was both relational, and scaled up, right? So that consistent data can now be used with Gen AI. So that was like the first big problem that we had to solve. And I'm very happy to say that we were able to get across the line on this one. But if you go to the next one, it then became about, how do I get all of this data into an LLM? What does it even mean, right? And this is where the interesting things start happening, right? So as you can see on the top right here, you have this data about your enterprise. So you have accounts and positions, you have transactions, you have fund performance, you have probably your other products and services. You also capture risk profile. So this is like, as an investor, are you moderate risk, high risk? Like what's your risk appetite? You also include customer service data, like your call logs, your emails, your phone calls, and all of that, right? And transcribe and put them into sort of a S3 bucket, like a folder, right? This is not connected to internet, right? This is your enterprise data. And then the question is, how do I plug all of this into an LLM, right? And the way you do that is by something called agents, right? This is not the same agents that James used. Unfortunately, they're both called agents, but this is more like a technical term, right? This idea that when you ask a question to an LLM, the LLM would need data to figure it out. LLM doesn't have the data because it's not tuned on, it's not trained on it, right? ChatGPT doesn't know anything about Emma. So how would ChatGPT go and get that information? That's basically through agents, right? So that's what we created. But we quickly realized that this model is not working. So it would give insane answers, right? Like it would probably give incomplete answers. It would give wrong answers at times. It would give incorrect counts of transactions, for example. And the reason was because it was using something called vector-based RAG architecture, right? So the idea of vectors is very simple. Like, it's like a cosine similarity between sort of text, right? It gets too technical, but the idea that you have like a bunch of text and your data, and it sort of figures out the closeness of the data to the query or the prompt, right? And it works well for unstructured data, but it actually works really poorly for structured data, right? So we moved on to figure out a new way to do it. So if you go to the next one, this is where we started thinking about using knowledge graph based RAG architecture, right? A knowledge graph is like a deeper understanding between the relationship of the data, right? So there's someone called Emma. Emma has accounts. Accounts has positions. Positions are for certain securities, right? This is like a structured knowledge, right? And you just don't want it to be like a free text knowledge, like a vector based, right? Just because they happen to be in the same sentence, that's why they are related. That's sort of a loose relation. What you want to do is you want to have a strong relationship between these. And that's where graph databases are helpful. So what we did was we moved away from a vector-based database for sort of structured data into a knowledge-based database. And then once we plugged this into the LLM, it all started working, right? It was able to reason. It was able to think about various aspects that you're asking. And maybe I can quickly show some of the examples. What do you think, Anna? Do we have time?
Yeah, Yeah, I think we have time. That'd be great to see.
Okay, let me quickly bring up my code base. Let me know if you guys see it.
Yep, let's see it.
Okay, so this is Jupyter Notebook. I know it's a little bit tech heavy for everyone, but I really wanted to show the fun of Gen AI. Why we are all so excited about it, right? This is the idea of something called reason and act, right? So if you ask an interesting question, so let's say an interesting question is something like this: list of customers with a risk tolerance that does not match their actual investment risk. Now that's a sort of an abstract question, right? Like think about asking that question in your general traditional BI, CRM models. It's almost impossible, right? Because you just came up with a really abstract question. Now, what you really want to do is you want to have the LLM have something called a chain of thought. So you're forcing LLM to think about this question, right? So once this question is posed to it, you can see how the LLM is working on it. So the first thought LLM has is, to find these customers whose risk tolerance does not match their actual profile, I will need to look at both the customer's stated risk tolerance and the risk level of their actual portfolio. This is all LLM doing, right? It's reasoning. It's thinking, okay, how do I even answer this question? And then it says, okay, to answer this question, I need to do the following steps, right? So it breaks down the problem into steps. And one of the steps is to get the data. So it says, okay, now go to the graph database and get me all the data for the customers whose stated risk tolerance and their portfolio holdings, right? And then it goes to the database and it figures all of that out. So all of this is generated by Gen AI. There's no human involved. Nobody's writing SQL queries. You can see the query generated by LLM right here. So this is almost a verbatim query that's generated by the LLM, and then it goes to the graph database, pulls out the data, then shows it to you. But it can also do something even more interesting and multi-step, right? So it can go back into this process of chain of thought. So it can do a thinking, it can get an answer. Based on the answer, it can think again, get more data. So this is just to show you how interesting it is and how much capability now wealth advisors can have at their fingerprint by asking any level of abstract question and just leave it to LLM to break down that problem into steps. And for each step, take an action. That action could be going to internet. That action could be going to LinkedIn. That action could be going to knowledge databases. And then combine all of this data and finally give you an answer. So I mean, there's a lot more to how all of this happens through prompt engineering and things like that, but I'm not getting into it. But yeah, this is roughly how we got it to work all together.
Very cool. Thanks for sharing that, Kritik. So this is a question, I guess, for the whole group, but based on this experience that we've had working on this internally, like what recommendations would you all have for clients that are maybe embarking on a similar project internally? Like any advice or thoughts on how they could be successful?
Maybe I can go first because I've been working with wealth advisors for some time now. And I think one of the challenges I see is that all of these wealth advisors are trying to build tools, right? Like basically help you find your advice, find your investments. You do your financial planning, whether it's your estate planning, whether it's thinking about 401k, whether it's 529 for your kids, right? And all of these different complex sort of financial situations is very personal, right? So Anna, you and I are different, right? Like I may think differently about my kids the way you would think about your financial planning, right? And one of the problems with this sort of linear way of building applications is that you can only build so many variations of an application, right? Now, we have been doing traditional web application development for a long time, right? And even from a user experience perspective, we tend to think of building user experiences with some if-elses, right? So, okay, if you are this age, you can go to this screen. If you're not, you can go to this screen, right? And these are all sort of rules-based transitions. But what's interesting is that in a hyper-personalized environment, you actually don't know what the rules are. Like it's really open, it's really dynamic and non-linear. And what I think is really interesting for wealth managers to think about is, how can I provide an interface that is sort of dynamic and really catering to a hyper-personalized view, right? I'll give you an example. So most of the millennials or some of the millennials are working in big techs, right? So as a big tech, I may have ESOPs, right? And I may have a large chunk of my investments through my company's stocks. That's very different from a 1960s person, right? Like that may be my worry, right? Is there any screen that you can create, statically that addresses that? Probably not. But depending on my situation, I may get a very interesting experience and a walkthrough of an application that sort of caters to my needs. So I'll pause there, but I think that's something interesting that most wealth advisors should probably start thinking about, this dynamic, non-linear, hyper-personalized way of sort of providing advice, or even having their customers experience their services and products.
I'll kind of jump in next, because I think I kind of touched on this when I was talking about the demo, but today, if you've got users and they want to do something, it tends to be that you've got to build a workflow for what they're going to do. And using these Gen AI systems, that might not be true in the future. It could be, in a way, things actually become simpler. It's like you don't have to know in advance all the steps of what somebody's going to do to solve a problem. It's like you're giving them widgets, much like you do today, but instead of trying to piece them together in a piecemeal way, you're basically letting Gen AI figure out how to use all these components to get an answer. So I think, like, my piece of advice would be, like, if you're trying to think about designing a new interface for a system like this, go back to the simple questions that you're trying to answer, and maybe throw away the 12-step workflow that you started with, and think about, is what I'm trying to do actually ultimately pretty simple? Like, I just want to know, what are all the notes that anybody entered anywhere in any system about this person, and just show them to me. And I don't care what database they came from. I don't care what system it came from. Just show it to me in a simple way.
Totally. Raj, do you have any thoughts from a product perspective? Any recommendations for people approaching these kind of problems?
Yeah, I mean, some of the questions we get around this is, this is definitely a paradigm shift in how you think about products, as both, Kotick and James mentioned. And one of the questions we get is, how do I even think about this from an ROI perspective, right? Does it make sense to, invest in something like this, as opposed to how we've been doing it in the past? And because it's so new, how do I measure the effectiveness? How do I measure the ROI? How do I measure, what are the KPIs that I need to take a look at? What are the metrics that matter, and those types of things? And the thing with these types of applications is it's a whole new class, I think, of products, and this class of products is really sort of horizontal. In other words, it can support multiple use cases, right? Because it's so flexible, right? So I think as from a product perspective, this is one area that's under, like, just a lot of thinking, a lot of development, and we're still thinking through some of those answers, like, how do we think about ROI? How do we think about NPV, things like that, and the metrics that matter? And how do we, from a product strategy perspective, think about starting to implement, like, one solution that can ultimately be sort of leveraged across, multiple vertical use cases. That makes sense.
I mean, the fact that it's all new is part of the fun, because, like, even just trying to figure out, like, how do I design a prototype for this? How do I even, like, mechanically do that in my design software so that I can make a prototype that looks like something reasonable, like how ChatGPT works? It's all, like, new ways of thinking. It's like, trying to, like, this is definitely all new. It's all going to change, which is why we're trying to just get out ahead of it.
Totally. So with that, what do you think, like, in your mind, what would be like a dream project that a client could bring to us?
It's like going back to the future to let's do a new way of doing CRM. That would be my way. That would be my answer.
Mm-hmm.
Let's make a new simple CRM based on Gen AI.
Yeah, basically take a greenfield approach, a blank sheet of paper, and let's see what we can come up with, given that we have this new technology, right? I think that'd be super interesting.
Yeah, I think I would say that I don't think the clients would have an option soon, right? Like, I think this is a train. This is a train coming towards you, right? And you can jump on it and be part of the journey, right? I think you can only imagine from ChatGPT 3 to whatever 4.5 or 4.0 that we have. In 2-3 years, you're going to be looking at ChatGPT 6 or 7, And you can only imagine the power those things will bring. So it's going to be a matter of time that I think people will latch on to this and would start creating applications. So I think it's almost like a race as well, right? Like I think the sooner you can adopt some of these technologies and the relevance of this and apply it in your organization, I think the better it is. And to your earlier point, Anna, as well, is that there are some challenges. So let's be honest about it, right? Like these are not perfect. There are still challenges around sort of making it a reality in an enterprise setup, specifically in finance, but it's getting there. I mean, I think there are clients who are already doing work in this area. So, I mean, I think a dream project would be, let's just do it, right? Like, let's just do this work. I think there's value. We have proven it ourselves by building this POC. I would really love people to contact us and see maybe more of the demo of the tech stuff, also the other work that James and Raj have been doing. But yeah, let's just do it. I think there's promise in this, and I think it's going to happen one way or the other.
Yeah, I think over the next 2 years, it's going to be really a discovery journey for a lot of firms, and the firms that really, step in and start doing that experimentation are going to be way ahead of the game, a year or two from now. And it's just, getting that process started, I think, is the most important thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think to go back to something James said earlier too, is like, I think this is a great opportunity to revisit some of those fundamental questions, like fundamental problem statements with like this whole new set of technology that is really, 5 years ago was something of sci-fi that we now have access to. I think that could result in some really interesting new solutions and new applications of Gen AI. So it's an exciting time. I have one last question for the group. I'm curious, we talked a lot about how we could leverage Gen AI for wealth management workflows here on this call, but I'm curious what other kind of topics this group has been thinking about, like what other applications there are of Gen AI in this space.
I've got to jump in on this one because to me, it's like, every project I've worked on at Lab 49 in the financial space, this applies to all of them. I mean, workflow, tasks, data, analysis, like keeping track of things. I can imagine having basically a compliance agent that's kind of built into this. So like, you're doing different work. Of course, there's lots of business rules. Today there are very cumbersome procedures around that. Maybe there's a way to do that in an interesting way with Gen AI, where it's kind of alerting you in real time rather than either just blocking you from doing anything or after the fact coming back and saying, oops, you shouldn't have done that.
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, I mean, I think I think Gen AI is a horizontal sort of capability, right? That can really support multiple use cases across the enterprise, not just in financial services, but HR, marketing, sales, a bunch of different areas, knowledge management, coaching, financial literacy, all those types of things. It's across the board. I mean, I can't think of an area where Gen AI would not be useful.
Yeah, I think some of the areas that we are working on, Anna, to your question would be, I think one of them is around sentiment analysis, which is interesting. It might look like old, right? So people have been doing sentiment analysis for a long time using traditional ML models, but I think those are sort of constrained, right? So like sentiment analysis really works on sort of language, right? And whether a particular sentence is positive or negative. But with LLMs, now you can have a broader context, right? So it can know whether the statement is relevant to a particular company a lot better than traditional ML models. It can figure out price action based on sentiment versus just pure sentiment analysis. So that's one area that we are looking into. Is pretty exciting. The other area is around sort of discoverability of APIs. Again, looks like a disconnected topic, right? But many engineers have to look for APIs in a large enterprise. You're talking about thousands of APIs. And today it's almost like, standing in front of sort of a ocean of APIs with no Google Maps, right? Like there's no one telling you how to get those APIs, where to get them from, what's the path to it. And I think Gen AI is a great solution to that problem. That's another one we are investigating at. But even things like investment analysis, right? So, if you're at an investment firm, there's like wreaths of documents and, you need to sort of go through to figure out how to create a case, how to create a deal. And I think a lot of sort of good work in that area as well. So yeah, I mean, it's exciting time. I think we're like both James and Raj said, I think it's unlimited opportunity in this area, but those are some of the ones we are immediately looking into.
Cool. All right, great. Well, it looks like we're about coming up on time. So unless there's anything else that this group wants to share, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up a bit. Thank you everybody for joining this webinar today. As I mentioned before, Lab 49 is a consulting firm that loves to look at these kind of problems and collaborate with your internal teams. So if you have anything in this space or in any other space that you're kind of digging into this year, we would love to hear from you. We'd love to work with you. Feel free to reach out to any of us on the call over email or on LinkedIn. We're always happy to chat. And thank you to the three of you, James, Raj, and Kritik. Thanks for taking the time to share this really interesting work and your thoughts on the space.
Thanks, Anna.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Anna, for organizing it. Appreciate it.
See ya.
Bye.